Welcome to the Dr. Nikki Starr Show, a podcast to support you in your spiritual awakening and personal development. As a spiritual teacher, healer, and intuitive coach, my intention is to empower you to live your ultimate potential and your ultimate life. As a former medical doctor and mystic, my role is to bridge the gap between science and spirituality to support you in understanding more of your multidimensional aspects. I share on a diverse range of topics, and it's all to support your greatest becoming. My mission is to continue reaching millions of people for the healing and awakening of humankind for the creation of the new earth. Thank you for being here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Dr. Nikki Starr Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nikki Starr, and today we have with us a dear friend, a soul sister, a fellow healer, and an incredible storyteller, Leah Lamb. She is so mystical with her storytelling, and we used to live in Topanga together. We actually used to live in the same home. We used to do Qigong together, and she used to host these story circles that were so powerful that literally reminded me how the power of a story can change your life, can heal a heartbreak, can help you transform whatever you're going through. And today we're going to talk about that and why that is and how stories really shape humanity. And so welcome, Leah. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's such a treat to get to go from, oh my God, across the world. We still get to talk to each other. I love this.
Me too. It's been one of the gifts of having guests on the podcast. And I would love for you to introduce yourself a bit more than, I introduced you more on like a personal level, but please share more about your magic and your wisdom and who you are and what you do in the world.
Well, I am devoted to storytelling, and it started as a little kid, right? I just loved stories, and they really became my escape, my love, my adoration. And then I had some pretty critical things happen in my young adulthood where some major crises happened. And what had once been my sanctuary for escape, for just enjoyment and pleasure, all of a sudden became my sanctuary for healing. And I really learned through actually the death of one of my best friends in high school, how writing, storytelling can be a way to make meaning of the world when nothing else can make meaning, and it can bring healing. So I kind of fell into it accidentally. And then, I got into the professional world of theater, and I ended up getting a master's in social work. And I was always in this kind of ride between how do we be protectors of the planet right now? Like, how do we be part of the healing? How do we address all the isms of sexism and social justice and racism? And how do we do it through the arts? Because I could feel that something came alive in me in the arts that didn't come alive in any other way in my life. And so I got to study, theater very, professionally as a young child. And then as I got older, I went and I studied spirituality. And I was like, wait a second, the basic principles are the same. I was like, what's going on here? And then it would be years later when I would learn in ancient Greece. Do you know this? In ancient Greece, rather than everyone having to train for war, everyone had to go through theater training. It was just like this was part of their culture, that everyone got to go to the theater. It didn't matter what their social status was. This was known as being an important, meaningful part of culture and society, and a part of helping us become who we really are. So I don't know, something about you, Nikki, is just inspiring me to kind of go all wild in my non-linear in my journey. But this eventually, in that search of how to be how to really play a role in these times, I ended up working at Al Gore's television network. I hosted the Green Channel there, and I got to see firsthand that news and information was not going to change the world. And that's why I went into it. I thought if we could just get people the information, it would give them the inspiration, the motivation, the activation. And when I looked at the data showed me that people weren't interested in information. People loved stories. And that, like, getting that information actually gave me the golden ticket into really stepping into how the genius loves to flow through me. And we all have genius. Like you have this epic genius, which I love playing with, and that in ancient Rome, on your birthday, they didn't celebrate you, they celebrated your genius. And I feel like now in these times, that's the trick, is to being able to give the genius that wants to live through us a way to thrive and get out of the story of whatever roles we're supposed to play in capitalism, because not all of our roles, not all of our geniuses play there, and so it's escaping that paradigm and letting that brilliance, genius come out. And that's one of the reasons why I love what you do, Nikki, is I feel like you really ignite that in people. You ignite people's fire to be in the truth of what they are and how to escape the stories that aren't real. Anyway, all that to say, I started a school for sacred storytelling, and it's really designed to help people come into the whole truth of what they are, help people navigate the times that we're in, all through this creative process, and really understanding story and story as a mystery school. And that's a little bit.
Yeah, and you're speaking to such an important piece, which is programming in a way. Like you spoke of like news and information. And so right now, in every moment, we're all being programmed. And the stories, like one of the greatest stories of all time that we know of is like the Bible, right? And like all the stories of those people who lived in those times and how that has been a big part of shaping our world, just like the news. But really, like what we know is like the news isn't always true, and it creates fear in people versus that empowerment. Like we talked about, like lighting that fire. And with storytelling, we can so light that fire. And I feel like when we think back to like Native American times, and even when there was that healthy, right relation with the earth and humanity and society and the nations and the families and the people, storytelling was a big part of life, like sitting around the fire telling stories. And now we have that with movies now, right? But even still, we're seeing censorship happen. And right before we hopped on this call, I was sharing with Leah that I'm reading this book called The Book of Love, and it's about the story of Mary Magdalene and Jesus and sacred union. And also they were sharing about certain like ancient like goddess Greek mythology stories. Like one is of Ariadne, and how the church deliberately like changed the story because it was a story about like love and loss and about persistence and like going for what you love and what you desire. And then they changed it and they removed the woman from the story, which was like, it was all about the love, but they took her out of the story. And then it was really just about defeating the centaur or the minotaur or whatever. And so maybe we want to talk a little bit about the importance and the power of storytelling. And you mentioned you have a story that they've also changed in time. And I want to bring light to this, because like, what are the stories you've been told in your life that have maybe programmed you to be a certain way, think a certain way? Like we know with Disney and women, and like women like kind of losing their power and thinking a man had to come and save them, versus like the more empowered version of sacred union, which is like man, woman, equal, different, but equal, and coming together. And because of their complements, sharing life and creating life from this more empowered place.
Gosh, you just said so much. And just to go back to the beginning of what you were talking about, where like, right, programming. And when I think of like, what is a story? It's in the most, non-romantic expression of it. It's an operating system, and it's an operating system that teaches us our values, our belief systems, and what to expect of the world. And just like you said, we get this from Walt Disney, we got this from TV shows, we get this from whatever conversations are happening around our table, in our families, in our communities, in our schools, and all along the way, we're absorbing these stories. And one time I was walking through Topanga, where we used to live, and so much of my inspiration comes from that land. Oh my gosh, it was such inspiring land to live on. And John Kane says that what is a myth, but the earth speaking out loud. And a story we know is created by a person. A myth, a true myth, we don't know the author. They kind of run wild. And as I was walking through Topanga Canyon one morning, it was the trees, it was the rocks. I don't know who said it, but they were like, Leah, you got to stop saying that story is an operating system. And I'm like, yeah, but people understand. And Topanga said, but it's something so much bigger. come on, tell them the truth. And I was like, okay, Topanga, like, what's the truth? And they said, story, it's a library of the soul. And I was like, right, like a true story is a library of the soul, where when I share the story that lives in me, when you share the story that lives in you, we're sharing our evolutionary consciousness, And so when you really share your story as a gift to give, right, which is a very different thing than when we're like, I'm in the middle of something, it's like, or when like, wow, I went through something and I've got something to share. I have a giveaway, and I went into the depths and I toiled with the demons and I climbed the ladder and I came back out, and now I can share how I did it. It's like when we do that in that sense of generosity, where we understand how meaningful our lives are, and how the giveaway comes through how we share our story. It's how we share our gifts, and there's a transmission of energy. I love hearing where people have those big moments in their life where they had a misstep. I love that. And then they came back into alignment. And I say a misstep rather than a mistake, because it's like, whatever, we're humans. We came here to learn. It's like, if you're not messing up in some way or another, then you're not being brave enough to live your life fully, because it means you're not living outside the lines. And it's like, how much can you grow? So it's like, there's a story right there that, that if we get out of alignment, that we're bad, or that there's shame or whatever, well, get back into alignment and you won't be ashamed, And so it's like, and that's part of our journey. It's like, and we can do that. We can support each other through how we hold each other's stories, and so oftentimes where we can project onto other people this, if I say, oh, I had this misstep, and then someone projects that onto me as like, oh, that blah, 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 and then they hold me in that, well, that's a really powerful energy that we're doing with each other in our stories. And one of the greatest generosities we can do with each other is say, oh, you're being initiated by life. Look, we're already using one of the most powerful tools of a storyteller, which is reframing for each other. This thing that happened with your love life, or this thing that happened with your work life that you're in the toiling with, oh, you're being initiated. How cool is that? And sometimes people get really enthralled in the lower energetics and they get stuck in the drama. And I say, I like my drama on the stage, not in my life, and so it's like, let it live out there, where it can be performative, and not here. And so when we go through those toils, and we can say, you can get like sunk down the dredges, and we know those energetics. I know you talk about that with your community so much, but we can lift up the experience, and we can get power from it when we say, yeah, this situation is really uncomfortable and it hurts, and it's disruptive. And when you come in and it's like, I'm being initiated, that means that something in me has to die. Some way I've been meeting life has got to go, so that something else can come back in. And when you meet your life like that, now you are really a sacred storyteller, because you understand that your life is in service to life itself. And you've moved out of the victim culture of like, life is so hard. And like, it's scary out there right now. Like, that's one of the stories that we have. One of the stories that's out there is that the world is not safe, and so much is, disrupted. But storytellers, we love chaos. You know why we love chaos? Because it's where creation begins. There's so much work to work with. And this is when we need your creativity super activated. We need your imagination. I just read something out of this book. Nikki, I'm so going off. I don't know what we started on, but something about your muse is feeding my muse. I'm like speaking all these things I don't usually make this kind of a constellation. So it's so fun to be in your presence. And I'll just say that, like, story comes alive in the listening of others. We are always feeding each other, through that. Different stories come alive in different ways, different people. So I just love what you are calling out. But I just read this book, and I have it right next to me, because I'm actually going to quote it in a class I'm teaching later. And it's called The Receiving: Reclaiming Jewish Women's Wisdom. And I love playing book tarot, where I was like, okay, show me what I need to know today. Oh my God, this book, it told me what I knew in my being, but I hadn't read or learned. And it talked about how in the Kabbalah, it teaches that, and it was a secret, it was kept secret for a long time, that our imagination was the gateway of our relationship with God. Mm-hmm. And so we can use the word God. I know that's triggering for people. Spirit, life force, whatever your relationship is with that which gives life. And I was like, yes, yes, because when we step in to our imagination, it gives us access to the unseen world. But it's a place that we really need, and I know that you teach this through so much of what you do, we need skills to go there. You need to be able to, you want to be able to protect your energy. You want to know what you're in service to, because that's what you're going to play with in those spaces. So I just went off. I want to go back to some of the things that you mentioned because they're so important, which is these old stories, they're so far away that now we look at them as fiction. But when they were created, people didn't see them as fiction. They saw them as the news of the day. This was how they got their news and information, was through story. And so to understand a story, you want to understand who was its creator, what were they in service to, what were the times that they were living in, what could they say, and what could they not say. And now you're beginning to learn how to truly make, what one of my teachers, Stephen Jenkinson, says called a forensic approach to understanding stories. And so one of my favorite examples is Medea. Medea came knocking at my door a long time ago, and she was like, I want a story of forgiveness. And I was like, okay, Medea, like, I don't know what that means. And it's a longer story that I don't have time to get into the whole thing today, but I did work with an advanced group, and we went in for a deep listen to the story and asking it, why are you wanting to be told in our times right now? And when I put out they said we're going to do a story about betrayal and forgiveness, and we're going to do a story ceremony, we're going to do a ritual, and this story is going to be our guide. I couldn't believe how many people jumped in and wanted to be there. So I was like, okay, this story is coming alive because there's something in our times that it's here to speak to. And so when we listened to the story and we researched and we got to know it, the story of Medea is very complicated. Right now, if you don't know the story of Medea, how it's been carried through time is that, Jason was told to go get the golden fleece. He needed power much more than he had. He met Medea, who was this wild witch, and she fell in love with him, and she gave him her power, and she did a lot of bad things to give him power. She killed her own family members. She killed a lot of people. He got the power he needed. He got the golden fleece. They went off and got married, had kids. He had an affair. He decided to go marry the another king's daughter for more power, for more land. When Medea found out, the rage of the sacred feminine, and she killed the king, she killed the queen, and she killed her children, and that's the story. It's a story of revenge, and it's a story of a woman that I can destroy what I create. So when we went to go, and talk about, like fear of the feminine, and I love these, like, where is this fear of the feminine? Where did it come from? And we want to understand that. We want to heal it. We need to know the source of the disruption. So when we went in to listen to the story and we did all this research, we learned about that Euripides, who was the playwright, he was paid off. He was paid to write Medea, the story. And then in history books, it literally says that, yes, Medea, yes, Jason wanted to go marry this other woman. And yes, Medea did get very angry. And yes, she did go after the king and the princess and his daughter. And that the true story, apparently, is that the villagers of that king for which she killed took revenge and killed her children, and then paid the playwright to write a different story that blamed her. And so now what's the story that gets carried through time? So, it's like when I heard Medea coming through and saying, hey, I'm asking to be redeemed. I'm asking for forgiveness for what I did. And how many of us say, oh, we've known sacred rage. Love will bring out all different kinds of things in us, right? And so we're hearing some part of the feminine that's asking for redemption, for forgiveness, for understanding, for healing. And when we place ourselves into the body of these stories that are asking for healing, and I really believe that there are all these stories that are around us that we have time and space like no other humans have on the planet to explore our consciousness. And I have to imagine that that's an evolutionary aspect that's wanting to be lived through us, and that we can heal these broken stories, perhaps in a way that no other person from any other time has been able to. And like, when you look at that, you're like, wow, what a privileged time to live on the earth. Even through all the disruption, perhaps, what if it's there to serve the greater healing of this planet and of us who live here? And so
Yeah.
when we start to look at the world like that, yeah.
Yeah, and you're reminding me of how this directly relates to what you were saying as like stories being the library of the soul or something along these lines, where I think of the Akashic records, which is basically all the events that have ever happened. And so when I'm doing timeline healing with a client, often we're going back to childhood or to a past life, and it's always like, what happened? It's always the story. It's the story that's being told to themselves about whatever happened and their relationship with that story and the events. And I call it timeline healing. And essentially, it's like we're rewriting the perceptions of the event so then they sit within you in an empowered way. It's like, what did you learn? Like, and I was just with a client yesterday in in-person retreat, and she's about to make a massive change in her life. And to support her in how she's going to live these events, I said to her, I'm like, how do you want to tell the story? Because that will then decide, how do you act? How do you show up? The choices you make, the choices you don't make. What if we lived every moment from like, what is the story I'm going to tell about my life? And equally, I agree of like, when something challenging is happening, even for myself or a client or whatever, I always say like, well, what kind of life would it be if you didn't have those challenging moments and that heartbreak and the things that move you? Like, what a boring movie it would be. Like, no one would want to make it out of like a movie out of your life if we were just like, everything was just like, here's the silver platter and you can just have everything you want without, and even connecting to what you said. I think you said imagination. I always say like fantasy, or like our capacity to dream. This is like the seed of manifestation, of creation of our life. So of course it's connected to the creator, because this is where like our seed, and that's why if you can dream it, you can do it, right? And so I love all these topics because it directly relates to us living our highest potential. Is the stories that we tell ourselves about the events that happen in our life, what we make things mean. Everything is symbolic, but we as the storytellers of our life decide like, okay, what am I going to make this mean about myself? Or what am I going to make this mean about this situation or my future or whatever? And I love the word initiation, because I do believe nothing is in vain, and we're never given a situation we can't handle. And it's all serving our greatest becoming. And so I like all of this, I just love so much. And then just kind of full circle of like what you said about the Medea story, like there's been a lot of deception in our times because of power or whatever. And I do really invite kind of like an openness to listen to stories from like, is this the only truth? Because even now I'm deep in the story of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and I have friends that still are like, what? They were a couple? And I'm like, yes. And I get so fiery about this because I am of this lineage. So I'm like, yes, they were. What do you mean? And so it's like, listen to, like, hear all sides of the story. Even in your life, when there's a conflict between people you love, like, listen to both sides. There's so many sides to a story. And this is how we can start to heal and forgive and have compassion, because everyone experiences events differently and people might tell it differently in their favor. And yeah, and I feel like a healing for the whole world happens when we kind of open our perception to like, just like there's many facets of truth, there's many sides to a story.
I love what you're saying. And it's like, the bigger the story, the bigger your life. Right. And it's like, if you're just committed to hearing one side and that's it, then it's like, well, what is small, narrow path you're on? And this word truth, I love this word truth. It's a carpentry term, and it means from here to there, right? Oops, I can't make it straight, And so it's like, if I'm saying this is my truth, then yeah, I'm totally accurate. But the person who's sitting right here is seeing something else, and they're also accurate in saying what their truth is in terms of what they're seeing. And so when we come at this as a storyteller, we can actually hold all of the truths. And it makes our lives so much bigger. It makes our capacity so much bigger. And one of the things that you were talking about, which I loved, which is, how are you gonna tell a story? And when things happen to us, when we actually go through for the transmutation, for the alchemy, for the healing, we are no longer the person that it happened to. So we don't want to tell the story from the same place, or we're just staying right there. But if I can come over here and tell the story from here and who I am now and what I learned from the experience, what I got from the experience, what I had to give up or surrender, or what was even taken in the experience, and how I'm different now I'm telling a different story. And one of the ways that I've come to understand story is I know that your community is going to understand this, is that our body, vehicle for the soul, right? That's pretty understood. And spirit can come and live through a story. And so we can experience the spirit of joy when we tell joyful stories. We can access our grief when we tell the stories of grief, and we can also open other people to touching the grief that lives in them. But it can also happen, like if I'm living in fear and that energetic is getting stirred up, whatever fear that lives in you will also get stirred up, right? There's alchemy between us. And so when we're aware that our stories are like these energetic beings that live inside of us, I got to just speak with this woman who went through this, oh my God, her story. Oh my God. I mean, like, I couldn't believe it. She was so joyful. She was so lovely. And she was telling me how she, had to go through prostitution, so much death, so much all this stuff, and how she was such a survivor and all these things. And here she was now, and she was just in awe of her life. She was literally in awe of her life. And I was like, what's your secret? Like, how did you get rid of all those old stories? Because I was in a moment where I was holding a really painful story. And she was like, Leah, I didn't get rid of anything. I just let it go. And I heard it. I got the transmission. It was like this little gate opened in my liver, right? And like whatever anger story that I was holding onto, that I was allowing to live in my energetic body, I was like, oh, what if I let you be free? What if I literally just open the door and allow you to go live somewhere else, or transmute you into another energy to release mine? And it was a really different approach than I've ever personally taken. A lot of my work with story is done through ritual. It's done in relationship to earth. And that's like one of the things I love about storytelling, is that we're listeners first. And when we're really listening to someone else's story and not just listening to our own story, through theirs, which a lot of times that's what people do. They're going to listen to their own story through yours. But if we can actually come to another place where we're truly listening to someone else's life experience and not going at it through the lens of judgment, we can receive the medicine of their life experience. And it's like this evolutionary experience where we don't have to we don't have to physically learn through someone else's lessons. We don't have to go through those missteps. We can, oh gosh, Nikki, I just learned this from you. Thank you so much. What an act of generosity. Now I can, when that situation comes in my life, I can see the pothole. I can go around it. I can go find my other next one. It's like, so yeah, it's a fun way to live when we really get to be in the joy of each other's lives together. And we get to do that through our storytelling.
Yeah. And that brings us to your work. And, you really teach people how to tell stories and all the different places they come from and where to source them from. And so I would love for you to, I've personally experienced your storytelling and your story circle, and I did it for a year online. I was actually thinking it's funny that you messaged, because I feel like at some point I thought of you and I was like, oh, I missed those. Like I could totally use one right now, actually. And I know, and I've even done a session with you too. We did a session trade, and I feel like, where can people find your work? Like what's going on, all that good stuff, because I do find stories are such powerful medicine. They are so spiritual and energetically healing. It's like another way we can access healing. And so how can people, I know, and by the way, I so support Leah's work that I'm an affiliate for her offerings right now. And with with happiness. And so you'll probably see me there as well. And yeah, so let us know how they can find you, what's going on in your world right now, because such beautiful medicine.
Yeah. It's such a treat to play with you today, and I loved having you in those circles. The best way to go is to go to leahlamb.com, and that's where you'll find the program that we're actually doing right now, which is called the Alchemy of Story. And this is a journey. This program, it's the most advanced program that I've ever taught, and it brings people through 5 different creative intensives through this journey of really understanding who you are as a conscious creator. What is your essence? How do you get to that mythic story, that part where you understand yourself through symbols, through archetype, through metaphor. You'll also get to understand how to do what we were talking about, which is create wisdom stories out of those moments that have disrupted your life. And you can do that for yourself and for others. How amazing. You learn how to create teaching stories and vision stories. And all along the way, you'll actually have 18 other guest guides who support this. So every creative intensive we have, there's an Indigenous storyteller there, because the transmission that we get, there's no better way to really understand story by like being around people who really know how to carry them. There's just something that happens. You'll also get to be in relationship with a great storyteller or writer who can really help you develop your skills and techniques. And then you'll also get to be around a healer, someone who really helps alchemize the story of our lives. And then I'm your main guide through the whole experience, and I'm completely committed to really awakening people to how to work with this ancient tool that's our birthright, that so many of us didn't get the opportunity to learn how to be with. So we have we have our first weekend intensive that's happening this weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Our first session is Thursday night. And then we also have a beginning in September where we meet every other week. So depending on how you like to do that, you can do a deep intensive dive, or you can do it every other week. And then what you were talking about, which was my soul stories, which is so fun. And I have it's called the Lunatic Membership for those who like to live by the moon. And we meet every new moon to receive what's called an oracle story, a soul story, which is where it's an ancient form of storytelling, and it's story divination. So I do a story divination. We step into ceremony, and you get to really experience, how is that story living through you? And you get to explore your own consciousness and be in ceremony in the new moon and set your intentions for the month. What's the story that you want to live in this month? And we come back together in the full moon. And in the full moon, we co-create a vision story together. This is new, Nikki. This is the membership's evolved since you were there. And this is where, we need this imagination muscle really strong. We need as many people as possible planting the seeds of a vision for the future. Like, you are the guardians of our future. And so that I'm so committed to this, that we do it every month, and it's super fun and inspiring. You cannot leave without a smile on your face. It's just fun. And then once a month, we also meet to do just creative jams. So if you're working on something, writing something, creating something, or want some space to do that, you'll do that and get some feedback and support. And that's super fun. So those 3 things, you can do private soul story sessions, come to the membership, and then the program, which is epic. It's really been my pride and joy to create this.
Beautiful. And also in the bonus, you're going to share 3 tips to how to change your story right now, right? Like the story you tell yourself about life or whatever's going on. And so you can catch us in there as well. And you're on Instagram. I know you don't use your Instagram as much, but your Instagram's Leah Lamb, right?
Yep.
Okay, beautiful. And so thank you all for tuning in today. And we will see you inside the bonus content and inside of Leah's magical offerings. And honestly, the stories are just more and more. I'm just seeing the power of stories, even through marketing, when we're sharing our work with the world for you conscious creators, and just in our lives when we're connecting with people, and as we're going through our healing process as well. Like, what's the story we want to tell the world and even ourselves to support us in our continued greatest becoming? And so thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Dr. Nikki Starr Show. Please like this podcast and share it with anyone you feel would benefit. Subscribe to the podcast to receive bonus content, and remember, every Monday the video version goes live on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for being on the Ascension path with me and for doing this great work.